Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. Tonight is our last night covering David. Considering one of the covenants is named after him, it's apt that we spend 4 or 5 weeks. I get the spicy/juicy nuggets at the end. If that title is ominous, The Failures of David, it's kind of meant to be. It could alternately be titled Thank God for Jesus, or a number of other things. But we are going to spend this evening covering the failures of David. There are 3 main ones. There's plenty of other opportunities to find fault in him and things we can learn from, but we're going to cover 3 specifically and not spend as much time on each one as you may think, because there's some really interesting stuff that I think we overlook when we spend too much time on the main one. So let me get started with prayer, and we'll get into it. Thank you, Lord, for your active word, that we get to come here and hear from you. We pray that your Spirit would be active in interpreting and in speaking to us and applying this to our lives, and that you would continue to show yourself faithful, that we would see that what we would take away is just how good, how patient, how loving, and faithful you are. It's in your name we pray. Amen. All right, so first failure of David. Let's get into this. So we're going to be in mostly 2 Samuel tonight. 2 Samuel chapters 11 through 13 we'll breeze through fairly quickly, and we'll spend most of our time in chapter 24. So we will get going on that. So first of all, the one we all know very well, probably David's most famous failure, his most famous sin, that of Bathsheba. Now, before I get into this one thing I want to point out is that there's a lot of good that David did. He was a man after God's own heart. There was a lot that was admirable about him, a lot of ways that he honored God and was everything that God wanted him to be in certain instances and in certain seasons and periods of his life. And I think it can be kind of easy, at least I know I am very prone to putting people on a pedestal and assuming, I need to live up to that person's standard. Part of that comes with me being a people pleaser, and if you're not one, maybe you don't have that issue as much, but I sure do. Boy, if only I could be as faithful as David. If only I could, especially, he's got 150 psalms, not all of them are his, but a ton of psalms that are credited to him, and these amazing worship songs that have been sung for thousands of years. And here I am, worship pastor of a church in Medford, Oregon, occasionally writing a worship song, hoping someday I can write a few more, that maybe get to a couple churches, and kind of feel daunted by how much time David spent in the presence of God and just how much he soaked there, and what we see from his psalms, the depths of his soul crying out and longing for the Lord. And that's a wonderful picture, but he also committed some of the most heinous sins in the entire Bible. And we need to look at both things to keep us from pedestaling anybody, really. I mean, if anybody of history is to be put on a pedestal, it might be King David. He's up there on the list as far as biblical people goes, for sure. Maybe Joseph would also be pretty high up on that list. So I appreciate that we get to look through this. So David, Bathsheba, Uriah, I think you all are very, very familiar with that story, so we're not going to spend a lot of time there. But in case you need a little refresher, David was supposed to be out fighting. It was springtime when the kings are off to war, but he decided he wasn't going to go to war. He was going to stay home. Sometimes bad things happen when you're not doing what the Lord calls you to do, and you are not operating inside of the things that you should be doing. And so he is wandering around on the roof, looking over his kingdom. Who knows what's going through his mind? Probably how wonderful the weather is and how nice it is that he's not dodging arrows right now. And he catches sight of Bathsheba, this beautiful woman on the rooftop, bathing and cleansing, and makes a poor decision. He's not what he's doing, what he's supposed to be doing. He's not where he's supposed to be, and he opens himself up to the pride of life and the lust of the flesh. And he says, go get her for me. And you don't say no to the king. She didn't have a choice. And the story itself is so rapid, and I think that's part of the point, is I think this probably happened like within the hour, from the beginning of the rooftop to her coming and then her going away. This is a get her for me right now. I don't want to think twice about this. I don't just make this happen now. And then most of actually chapter 11 and 12 is actually the repercussions of what happened afterwards, bringing Uriah, her husband, back from battle and trying to get him drunk to go sleep with his wife so that they can cover up the fact that she is now pregnant. And then all of the lying and covering up that goes through all of that. And then, remember, it doesn't work out. Uriah ends up being a more honorable man than David and doesn't go back to his house to be with his wife. He sleeps at the entrance to the palace along with the servants of the king because all of his brothers are off at war, and he's not going to take advantage of the fact that he's home and enjoy pleasure and enjoy being with his wife. He's standing in solidarity with his brothers and that commitment and that oath. And that bugs him to no end. Well, now I got to kill the guy. So he gives Uriah instructions for his own death, says don't open these, and sends him back, instructs Joab to have Uriah go to the front of the army, have everyone else stand back, and Uriah dies. And then he covers that up for a little bit, and then the prophet Nathan comes and gives him that parable of the sheep and the two men who have a poor man with one sheep and a rich man with many, many, many sheep. And he goes and takes the one of the poor man's and kills it and feeds it to the guests. And David goes all up in arms. Who is this guy? We got to punish him. We got to, jail him forever. Kill him. Do what he got to do. And then Nathan goes, you are that man. And he instantly realizes he's been found out. God has seen. I think he thought he might have been a little bit sly, but God has seen. There's a lot in that story that has been covered many, many, many times, so that I'm breezing by that one is because I think it's the first we go to because the sins that he commits are probably the most obvious. They are the most in line with the Ten Commandments and very, very big, capital S sins, not that there's little s necessarily, but just clearly, if you even read the Ten Commandments, you would know everything that David did here was wrong. And the next two that we go through are a little bit more subtle and not quite so obvious. But this is the beginning of a downward spiral for the family of David, and we'll show you how that progresses as we go through these stories. So in David, Bathsheba, and Uriah, the first section on your sheet, for Bathsheba, there's probably more, but here's 4 failures that I picked out. David fails by abusing his authority for selfish gain. No, like I said, you don't say no to the king. Bathsheba did not have another option except perhaps being put to death. I mean, who knows really what would have happened in that moment. But it's just understood. He has the authority from God to lead the people Israel, to shepherd them on behalf of God, towards holiness, towards righteousness, towards the continual conquering of the land. I mean, at this point in the story, Israel still hasn't even taken all of the land that they were supposed to when they first came in. There's still all kinds of pockets. In fact, we'll get to it later, but the Temple Mount isn't even taken yet. It's owned by a different guy, and I mean, it's like literally meters from Jerusalem. It is owned by territory that they should already be theirs. Should have been theirs, but for probably couple hundred years by now. So he's using his authority not for the will of God, but for the purposes of his own selfishness. Obviously, committing adultery, 7th commandment. Committing murder, 6th commandment. These are real basic, real low-hanging fruit. These are real easy to see, and very, very blatant sins. And idolizing pleasure, the 1st commandment. You shall have no other gods before me. Well, the God of sex, the God of I want what I want right now, the God of instant gratification, is what he decided to follow. So those are 4 out of 2 Samuel 11 and 12 with David and Bathsheba. And like I said, I skate right by that story because I think we all know it pretty well. And I want to spend more of our time in 2 other stories that are also well known, but David's role in them is maybe a little bit less obvious because there's a lot other players going on. The narrative in chapters 11 and 12 is heavily David did. And the last one's more so that way too, but particularly the next one we're going to look at is very much more, he's kind of a background player. And we'll show you how that all goes down. So interestingly, we go right out of chapter 11 and 12. And so David has realized that he sinned against the Lord. Remember, the child that Bathsheba became pregnant with died, and David was pleading. And then when the child died, he arose and cleansed himself, realized this is the judgment of the Lord. And then the end of this is actually kind of happy because then it says that Solomon is born, which is actually interesting because Solomon is the 4th born of Bathsheba. Well, technically 5th, the 4th living son, but the 5th of David through Bathsheba. So actually, this little bit here is kind of just a narrative turning around of, hey, God is still faithful. By the way, Solomon is born to Bathsheba. But this is not linear. Solomon was actually the 5th son of Bathsheba, 4th living. So right after this entire failure of David, we get into chapter 13, which is Amnon and Tamar. Now, I think you all know that story decently well as well, but we're going to spend a little more time here because there's some really interesting nuances regarding David. So we'll start reading in chapter 13, verse 1. Now Absalom, David's son, Absalom is the 3rd born of David, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar. And after a time, Amnon, David's son, this is David's firstborn, loved her. And Amnon was so tormented that he made himself ill because of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her. So Amnon has a friend, and he gets this brilliant idea of a way to trick her into getting alone with her and being able to get what he wants. Verse 5, lie down on your bed and pretend to be ill, and when your father comes to see you, say to him, let my sister Tamar come and give me bread to eat and prepare the food in my sight, that I may see it and eat it from her hand. A little bit of an odd request, but, I think that's kind of the dun-dun-dun in this story. Verse 6, so Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill, and when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, please let my sister Tamar come and make a couple of cakes in my sight, that I may eat from her hand. Then clueless David sent home to Tamar, saying, go to your brother Amnon's house and prepare food for him. So Tamar obediently went to her brother's house where he was lying down. She took the dough and kneaded it in the cakes in his sight and baked the cakes. She took the pan and emptied it out before him, but he refused to eat. Then Amnon said, send everyone out from me. So everyone went out from him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, bring the food into the chamber that I may eat from your hand. Verse 11, when she brought them near, he took hold of her and said to her, come lie with me. She obviously refuses, gives him really good reasons not to. Verse 14, but he would not listen to her, and being stronger than she, he violated her and lay with her. And then immediately throws her out, because now his hatred for her is greater than his lust was for her, and he suddenly despises her for the sin that he has now committed. Verse 18, now she was wearing a long robe with sleeves, for thus were the virgin daughters of the king's dress. So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her, and Tamar put ashes on her head and tore her long robe that she wore. And she laid her hand on her head and went away crying aloud as she went. So we don't have David showing up a whole bunch in this. We have him as coming to visit Amnon, he's the one that basically sets up so that this situation happens. And then we don't get a reference of David again until verse 21, and we only get one reference. So Tamar lived a desolate woman in her brother Absalom's house. Verse 21. When King David heard all these things, he was very angry, period. And the next verse is about Absalom. That's all we get. When King David heard all of these things, he was very angry, and he did nothing. Absolutely nothing. The Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls actually add this phrase. It's put in here. I don't know all the rules on why some of that stuff doesn't get put in on certain translations, but the Dead Sea Scrolls add at the end of this, when he heard all these things, he was very angry, but he would not punish his son Amnon because he loved him since he was his firstborn. So Amnon just did what David did a few years prior. We don't know the exact timeline, probably not that awfully long. Exact same situation. Firstborn son committing the same sin of the father. And yet we don't see David taking any initiative to do anything in multiple ways. David fails in multiple ways. Let me get back to the slide. David fails by not protecting Tamar beforehand. There's also not really being heavily involved in his kids' lives. Now, yeah, he's the king, but he didn't have thousands and thousands of kids. And this is his firstborn, his secondborn, his thirdborn. I don't know when in the line that Tamar was born, but it's not too many kids to keep up with. And he doesn't protect her. He doesn't sense that something is off. Apparently, all of Amnon's friends recognized that he was lovesick and recognized that there was something going on. It says one of his servants was like, "Sir, why are you downcast day after day after day after day? You are like constantly making yourself physically ill because of your desire for Tamar." So it's not like he was hiding it. I mean, other people recognized it and told him to do something about it. It was that obvious. He was very much wearing it on his sleeves. If David was around at all, he should have seen something, but he doesn't. Not only that, but he does not provide for her afterward. There are one of two things that should have been done if you pay attention to the law regarding Amnon. Either Leviticus 20:17 says that anyone who commits incest must be cut off from Israel and put out from the assembly. So he's not allowed to be within the walls of a city, not allowed to participate in any of the tabernacle worship or any of the festivals. You are cut off from Israel for committing incest. Or, according to Deuteronomy 22:28 and 29, he is required to marry Tamar in order to provide an inheritance and a home and a living for her. Now, granted, this is God making the best of a bunch of broken people and a broken system. You think how cruel it would be to force Tamar to marry Amnon, her rapist. But the reality is the other option, what actually happened to her, is she just basically gets shut up by Absalom and lives the rest of her life as a widow. Any dream of a family, gone. Any dream of a husband, gone. Any dream of a healthy, intimate relationship and experience with a man for life, gone. Any dream of any sort of princesship or any other type of, enjoying the fact that she is of the royal family, gone. She is just a destitute widow, essentially, shut up for the rest of her life. I don't know how old she is here, but not likely very old. She was still a temple virgin. My guess is probably in her teens. Her life is essentially over now, as far as you would think of being free to do what you want and having dreams and desires and hopes and all of that. The rest of her life is ruined, essentially, by this one act. And David does nothing to provide for her. It never even says that David does anything about it. It's Absalom, Tamar's brother, who provides for her, but even we won't even get into that. That's a whole other thing. We could spend the entire night just talking about all the dysfunction in this story alone. But I want to specifically, obviously, talk about David, because he is the namesake of the covenant that we are now in since 1 Samuel 7, or 2 Samuel 7. 2 Samuel 7. And the third thing we see is favoritism instead of justice. Like that Dead Sea Scroll comment said, Amnon is the firstborn. And there's also some speculation that Absalom knew this was going to happen and finally found an opportunity to kill Amnon, because Amnon's the firstborn. He's the next to the throne. We don't really know much about the secondborn, Kileab, or also called Daniel. You'll hear almost nothing about him. We know a lot about Absalom. I mean, most of, chapters 14 through 22, I think, 20 are Absalom in 2 Samuel. So Absalom, there's a lot of speculation that he was aware of Amnon's plans, and he didn't stop Tamar because this would give him an excuse to kill Amnon to be able to actually take the throne. So much brokenness, so much nastiness going on in here. All of it, in my opinion, the door opened because of David and Bathsheba and all of the brokenness that introduced into the family. Because up to that point, I mean, David wasn't perfect, but man, it was Saul killed his thousands, David his 10,000s. I mean, David can almost do no wrong up to this point, and he's following God, and he's seeing prosperity, and he's seeing victory, and it's just a mess after Bathsheba. Now, there's blessing throughout, but that's the faithfulness of God in his covenant promises to David. That's not because David is being obedient. Now, he does turn things around in some ways, but we see this tipping point in this Tamar and Amnon story is, I'm going to go back to the passage before I keep going on there because there's one more thing I want to go on. But if we keep reading through the rest of chapter 13, we see another really interesting thing about David. So Absalom is now, so the end of verse 22 here, but Absalom spoke to Amnon neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had violated his sister Tamar. And then for 2 years, he starts plotting. He starts planning his revenge. He gathers all of the sons of David together, has a big old party, gets everybody drunk, and then he kills Amnon. And this report comes back that all of the king's sons are killed. It's a false report. Only Amnon is dead. And we see here, let me find the verse. When I was studying this, I had the text a lot smaller. And then when you enlarge the text, everything moves from where your eyes were last seeing it. So I got to find it. We're in chapter 13. Chapter 13, verse 32. But Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother, said, "Let not my lord suppose that they have killed all the young men." By the way, Jonadab is the same guy who told Amnon to do this to Tamar. So this scum is still hanging around. "Let not my lord suppose that they have killed all the young men, the king's sons, for Amnon alone is dead. For by the command of Absalom this has been determined from the day he violated his sister Tamar." So the plot was known for at least 2 years. "Now therefore let not my lord the king so take it to heart as to suppose that all the king's sons are dead, for Amnon alone is dead." So then Absalom flees. 36, and as soon as he had finished speaking, behold, the king's sons came and lifted up their voice and wept, and the king also and all his servants wept very bitterly. But Absalom fled and went to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, king of Geshur. And David mourned for his son day after day. So Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there 3 years. And the spirit of the king longed to go out to Absalom because he was comforted about Amnon since he was dead. This is a really messy couple verses. There's so many weird things going on here. So Amnon runs away because now he's fearing for his life because he just killed David's firstborn as his thirdborn. And David mourned for his son day after day. What did he do when Tamar was violated? He got really angry. That's it. He got really angry. Maybe he threw something at a wall. I don't know. Maybe he kicked a chair over. I don't know. Maybe he angrily ate ice cream. I don't know. But there's no mention of anything other than an initial reaction of anger. And I wonder if Bathsheba is going in the back of his mind. What have I done? What have I introduced into our family? So Absalom flees, a murderer, which is now just like David. And the spirit of the king longed to go out to Absalom because he was comforted about Amnon since he was dead. So there's this sense that justice has been done, and he's a little bit comforted about that. Okay, well, maybe the wrong has been righted by my other son, but it wasn't by me, David. and he wants Absalom to come back. I almost think of it like, guys, just stop fighting. Let's come together. Let's all get along. Let's not keep perpetuating this. But clearly you see that David becomes completely reactionary. The only thing that David participates in is making sure that the event he didn't know about it, but all of his actions make sure that all of this actually happens, and then all of his recorded actions are reactionary. And what we see, there's this great quote that I just wanted to read from the ESV commentary. David appears as a weakened, irresolute shadow of his former self, manipulated by others and unable to exercise royal authority. Clearly, his kingdom is failing to portray the messianic ideal. The corrosive effect of his sin undermines his personal conduct and destroys the peace and harmony of his household. So at this point, there's really no murder or serious internal family problems up until now, but Absalom introduces the sword into the house of David. And if you keep reading on into 1st and 2nd Kings and Chronicles and all of that, this eventually divides the kingdom of Israel into the two different tribes. You've got Solomon that follows David, but then Rehoboam follows Solomon, and Rehoboam is detestable and very evil in the sight of the Lord, does all kinds of things that are terrible. And so the northern tribes rebel, and Jeroboam becomes the king of the north, and Rehoboam in the south. These are David's grandsons. So this is not that far. This is, 10 generations later, and they forgot. Rehoboam and Jeroboam probably knew David, or at least were very closely tied to him, being grandsons, sons of Solomon. So from this point on, we see just this brokenness that doesn't ever really seem to be repaired that enters into the family, specifically at David and Bathsheba, when he commits adultery and commits murder and commits idolatry and abuses his authority. And David was the best king Israel had, at least for the longest span of time. We have Josiah and some other ones that were good for seasons. But it's the king Jesus is of the line of David. There's so much to look up to about David as king, and he did all of this stuff to Israel and to his whole family. The third story is probably the most confusing and the most polarizing as far as commentaries go. Like all the study I'm doing, there are polar opposite answers about what's going on here. So I'm going to share with you what I think is going on in this third section. We'll go all the way to the last chapter of 2 Samuel, chapter 24. And I want to show you something real quick before we get there. Chapter 23 is all about the David's mighty men, his 37 mighty men. And it goes through listing them all, maybe not in any particular order, but all of the different things that they did and the number of people they killed and all of their conquests and everything like that. Look at this last verse of 2 Samuel 23 before we get to this last failure and sin of David. So this is ending with a list. Here's all 37 of the guys. Hezro of Carmel, Parai the Arbite, Igal the son of Nathan of Zobah, Bani the Gadite, Zelek, blah, 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 blah. Verse 39, Uriah the Hittite. And instantly we go into chapter 24. I don't think Uriah was lowest on the totem pole. I think this is the author very specifically creating this transition. Hey guys, look at these amazing men who backed David in all of his conquests. They were his bodyguards. They were his men who made everything happen. Oh yeah, one of the guys was Uriah the Hittite, whom he murdered and stole his wife. And here we go, chapter 24. This is when David takes a census. And there's a lot going on here that honestly there was a bunch of commentaries that I just plain didn't agree with. I think they're missing some points in here. I don't often say that, but man, this thing is polarizing. So we're going to get into this. Before we go too far in here, we're going to jump way back into Exodus, but let me read the first few verses. Chapter 24 of 2 Samuel. Again, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. This is likely because of Saul's treatment of Gibeah and some of the things that are happening in chapters 19 and 20 and 21. And so God incited David against them, saying, "Go number Israel and Judah." So the king said to Joab, the commander of the army, who was with him, "Go through all the tribes of Israel from Dan to Beersheba, and number the people, that I may know the number of the people." But Joab said to the king, "May the Lord your God add to the people 100 times as many as there are." Why does it matter how many there are? God is faithful. He keeps his covenant with us. There's always going to be tons of people, right? Why do you have to number them? Verse 4, but the king's word prevailed against Joab and the commanders of the army. So Joab and the commanders of the army went out from the presence of the king to number the people of Israel, and they spent the next 9.5 months roughly numbering the people. One of the things that makes this so complicated is there is a repeat telling of this story in 1 Chronicles chapter 21. And in chapter 21, it says Satan incited David against them. Now that's a problem. Was it Yahweh or Satan? That's the Lord here, L-O-R-D, full caps. That's Yahweh. That's the name of the Lord. Which one is it? I think it's both. And we'll get into all of that, all the reasons why, but I think that it's both. Because inherently, a census is not an evil thing. Saul took 2 censuses that are recorded in 1 Samuel, and there was no problem with those. But we go all the way back to Exodus 30, verses 11 through 16. So this is when the Lord is giving all of the law to Moses. Exodus 30, verse 11 through 16. The Lord said to Moses, "When you take the census of the people of Israel, then each shall give a ransom for his life to the Lord when you number them, that there be no plague among them when you number them." Remember that. "Each one who is numbered in the census shall give this, half a shekel according to the shekel of the sanctuary. Half a shekel is an offering to the Lord. Everyone who is numbered in the census from 20 years old and upward shall give the Lord's offering. The rich shall not have more, and the poor shall not give less than the half shekel when you give the Lord's offering to make atonement for your lives. You shall take the atonement money from the people of Israel and shall give it for the service of the tent of meeting, that it may bring the people of Israel to remembrance before the Lord so as to make atonement for your lives." So this is really interesting because this is kind of like just a nationwide tax. But it's so much more than just funding the government. We're actually funding the service of the tabernacle, feeding all of the Levites, taking care of all of the things that go on in the temple, replacing the oil for the lamps, and all of the various things. This is a good thing, and it has 2 primary functions. The first one is to help people recognize that God owns his people. Notice that the price is the same, whether you're rich or poor. It's a half shekel. It doesn't matter. It's not a graduated tax plan, a 22% if you make over $104,000 or anything like that. It's just half a shekel. And that levels the playing field. Now, that may hurt more coming out of the pocket of the poor person, but the point is, it doesn't matter how much money you have, the price is the same for atoning for every single one of you. God owns all of you. It's not really meant to be a tax to fund the government. It's symbolic in a lot of ways. Now, it does have the function of being able to help provide for the tabernacle, but it's a symbolic thing that all of you need atonement, and all of you are worth the same in God's eyes, regardless of what your earthly status might show. And the second thing is this. It's that rather than draft for war, which is often what you do with a census and when you count and, something like that, this is God's way of telling him, hey, I'm going to commit to providing you abundant peace. I have every right, because I own you, because you are mine, to send you all to war, to make you obey, and to just spend your lives in order to accomplish my goals. But instead, my covenants are not, if you kill enough people, I will give you rations. It's if you obey me and you keep my covenant, I will give you abundant peace. I will give you prosperity beyond what you could possibly imagine. And so this census tax is a reminder of those two things. You are God's people, and he is committed to giving you good things. He is committed to blessing you. And it's also a means of restoring covenant relationship by atoning for all of Israel's sins in one communal act, which is it's pretty impressive. I mean, if you look at the cost as it gets broken down, like in Deuteronomy, for what the offering is for various sins, a half a bull for this, 2 doves for that, a male goat for this, a male goat and a male ram for that. I mean, it gets expensive to atone for sin. And in the census tax, the entire nation just pays half a shekel each, and the entire nation is atoned for in the sight of the Lord. And this is a means by the Lord saying, hey, you're walking away from me. We're going to do this census tax, and I'm going to be drawing you back to myself. Now, we don't have record of how often this happens, but we have record that it happens often enough that it's not just a one-time thing, because there's some argument about that in various commentaries, whether this was a one-time thing that it did once just to fund the tabernacle at the beginning to acquire everything, or whether this is more common. Now, it's probably not yearly, but it's in every so often the Lord will incite or will draw the current leader, hey, let's do a census. Let's get this ball rolling again on reminding you who you are, whose you are, and what I'm all about. Let's stop getting distracted by all the things of this world, and let's come back to me. So with that in mind, we go back to 2 Samuel 24. Scroll down there. 24. Here we go. All right, so they've gone through. They took about 9 months to get the whole census. And Joab gave the sum of the numbering of the people of the king. In Israel, there were 800,000 valiant men who drew the sword, and the men of Judah were 500,000. So he's got a pretty good-sized army. Verse 10, but David's heart struck him after he had numbered the people, and David said to the Lord, I have sinned greatly in what I have done. But now, O Lord, please take away the iniquity of your servant, for I have done very foolishly. Now, interestingly, and this is something that it seems like a lot of the commentary as I was reading just overlook, who was God angry with in the beginning of verse 24? It's not David. It's Israel. As far as we know, David is in the right of the Lord here. The Lord was kindled against Israel. Now, David is responsible for Israel, so I don't think he's off scot-free. But at this point, there's no indication that David has sinned against the Lord. In fact, if you read this, he's obedient, actually even pushing against Joab, whom he greatly trusts, and all of the commanders of the army, Joab and the commanders of the army. So, probably the mighty men that were just in the list in chapter 23, all these guys that have given their entire life to him and that are probably trustworthy and wise. David pushes against all that peer pressure and says, no, this has to be done. We're doing this. Problem is he doesn't do it in the right way. There is no mention of any gathering of any money. There was no half shekel taken. There was only numbers. And the numbers are reported. Now, traditionally, you would count the men, but the numbers are reported men who drew the sword. David's report, he was more interested about fighting men who are able-bodied, in case he ever needs an army. At this point, David, the Lord doesn't tell him, David understands by his own will, his own heart, I have sinned greatly in what I have done. And verse 11, when David arose in the morning, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Gad, David's seer, saying, go and say to David, thus says the Lord, 3 things I offer you. Choose one of them that I may do it to you. All right, multiple choice. So Gad came to David and told him and said to him, shall 3 years of famine come to you in your land? Or will you flee 3 months before your foes while they pursue you? or shall there be 3 days pestilence in your land? Now consider and decide what answer I shall return to him who sent me. I think this question is not actually 3 options. I think this question is a test. If you notice David's response, I think he passes the test. I think he understands what God is telling him. Then David said to Gad, I am in great distress. Let us fall into the hand of the Lord, for his mercy is great, but let me not fall into the hand of man. Now, this could mean he didn't want to run away from people for 3 months because he'd been running away from people his whole life. And in some ways, it seems like he doesn't actually answer because 2 of those options are not man. One of them is a 3-year famine. One of them is a 3-day pestilence, some sort of plague, COVID, or something of that nature. Back in Exodus 30, do you remember what the punishment was for not paying the census tax? Oh, it didn't go back. Come on. All right. Then each shall give a ransom for his life to the Lord when you number them, that there be no plague, pestilence, among them when you number them. So there is inherent danger in numbering the people of Israel. And way back in Exodus 30, there was this promise of a plague if you do not do this correctly or if you do this for the wrong motives and for the wrong reasons. And I think this question, actually, there is one right answer. Shall it be 3 years of famine, 3 months of running away from guys, or 3 days of pestilence? Exodus 30 ringing in the back of his mind. Oh, I have not done this the way the Lord commanded me way back in Exodus 30 to do this. Now, David should know better. I don't know if you remember, but when a king becomes king, or in the process of becoming king, they have to write out their own copy of the Torah, word for word. That's a long process. In that process of writing it out, they would have come across every single one of these commands and written them out. And remember, usually when you wrote it out, you did it really slowly. Where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, they have history that shows that they would do the copying 1 letter at a time. So when they were making manuscripts and copies of the Torah, you'd have maybe 20 or 30 writers sitting in a room, and one person would be reading out 1 letter at a time. A. And then everyone would write down A. And then they would all say it back. A. B. Then everyone would write down B. Double check, walk around the room. I mean, it could take a whole day to get through 1 sentence. So this is not just scribbling it really quick in your journal as fast as you can to complete the assignment. I think this is where David writes Psalm 119 from, and a lot of his Psalms is from the time, hours, weeks, months, steeping in the Torah, writing every single letter out perfectly for his own personal copy of God's law. David should know this backwards and forwards better than anybody else in the entire kingdom. So David's response here, let us fall into the hand of the Lord, for his mercy is great, I think is both a prayer, it's both a request, Lord, I know you are merciful, please be merciful to me and to the people, and an acknowledgement that the Lord is the only one who can judge justly. Because you could argue that the 3-year famine, is also by the hand of the Lord, but the problem with famine is that rich people aren't affected as much by the famine as poor people are. But COVID doesn't care how much money you have. It's just going to kill whoever it wants to kill. There is no, everyone gets affected equally regardless of their status. Verse 15. So the Lord sent a pestilence on Israel from the morning until the appointed time, and there died of the people from Dan to Beersheba, north to south, 70,000 men. Probably higher if you count women and children. I don't know if this is a men or a mankind thing. My guess is it's men, and it's probably in the hundreds of thousands. Verse 16, and when the angel stretched out his hand toward Jerusalem to destroy it, the Lord relented from the calamity and said to the angel who was working destruction among the people, "It is enough, now stay your hand." And the angel of the Lord was by the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. This is the Temple Mount. The angel of the Lord is hovering over the future place of the temple that David has already committed to providing all of the materials for to build. Verse 17, then David spoke to the Lord when he saw the angel who was striking the people. How terrifying must that have been? And said, "Behold, I have sinned, and I have done wickedly, but these sheep, what have they done? Please let your hand be against me and against my father's house." Really, really great hint at the messianic purpose of the line of David and the king of Israel, and what the actual goal of the king is to be the sacrificial atonement for the rebellious people. But it's also a little bit of cluelessness on David's part, honestly. What have they done? Have you been reading your Bible? Have you been king over Israel the last 25, 30 years? Like, what do you mean, what have they done? They've rebelled in every single way possible, multiple times. They spend their nights inventing new ways to rebel. And yet he sits here boldly and goes, "Lord, put it on me. Let your hand be against me." God doesn't take him up on that offer because David can't. He can't bear the sin of the people. He has too much of his own sin. He has any sin. We already know that he is not capable of bearing the sin of the people. And then in verse 18 through to the end, we won't go through it super detailed, but David basically ends the pestilence by going and purchasing the Temple Mount, which should have been conquered a long time ago and should have already been in their hands. And then he offers a burnt offering to the Lord on it. So David bought the threshing floor and the oxen for 50 shekels of silver, and David built there an altar to the Lord and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. Now, it's interesting that he buys it, because when he goes up to Araunah, David says, "Hey, you can have it. You're the king of Israel. You can have it. It's yours." And the king said to Araunah, "No, I will buy it from you for a price. I will not offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God that cost me nothing." So we actually do get a hint. Although David does not fully atone for all of the sin of Israel, and he's not fully the Savior, he does bear a price in order to purchase the end of the pestilence and the end of the suffering and establish the ground on which his son Solomon is going to build the temple. And this is really where, now we get the next chapter, it's 1 Kings. This is how the Temple Mount comes to be prepared and ready for Solomon to build the temple, so that this is the place where people come for mercy and for grace and for peace. And so it's such a mixed bag, because David cannot atone for the sin of Israel, but he does bear a slightly messianic resemblance and have a little bit of a foretaste of the price Jesus would pay. Now, 50 shekels of silver was nothing to David compared to the blood of Jesus, but it still was a cost, and there was a benefit to the people of Israel because of it. This is where the failures get a little bit more convoluted, and why I wanted to spend more time here. In the Israel census, there's a lot of ways that David fails. First, he forgets the law of the Lord. He should have known Exodus 30. I mean, a census is kind of a thing that a ruler is supposed to do. He should have been aware of what God was expecting him, both because he wrote Exodus 30 by hand at some point in his life, and because he is the king. He forgoes his mediatory role in atoning for Israel's sin in a lot of different ways. The point of the census, remember, for Exodus 30, the reason you did the census was it was one of the ways that God could tell his leader, whether it was Moses or Abraham or David, whoever it was, hey, by the way, you guys are going astray. You guys should do a census, and I'm going to provide you an opportunity to come back to me. You guys need some atoning work done. And then they started doing that. David completely forgoes that mediatory role, and he sits back and goes, well, what can I gain from it? I'm going to choose to find pride in military might from the census. I am not going to use this as an opportunity to atone for the people's sin, to remind them who they are in God, to remind them whose they are. I'm going to use it to puff up my stats, to make myself feel better when I go to bed or when I think about conquering the next town over, that I've got 130,000 1.3 million able-bodied men. And there are some who draw some conclusions from Rehoboam that this census actually ends up setting up Israel for corvée labor, which is, it's like vassal slave labor under a king in lieu of paying taxes, which interestingly, David doesn't take a tax like he should have, the half shekel. Rehoboam ends up using this later for corvée labor to build a lot of Asherah poles and other abominations to the Lord. And there's the speculation, you should only take this as speculation because the Bible doesn't explicitly say, but it's possible David didn't take that half shekel tax so that everybody who was counted in the census now owes something to the government because nobody paid. And if you didn't pay, the other option was vassal labor. There's no indication that David ever took advantage of that, but it's possible Rehoboam looked back and went, hey, by the way, we have history of a census here, and I have history that nobody paid their taxes, and introducing slave labor to hundreds of thousands of Israelites. So you see how these failures of David continue to allow greater brokenness, greater degrees of fracturing to happen inside of his family. But we're not going to end just there, because the end of David's story is in 1 Kings. And this is so fascinating to me, especially after spending all day in his failures. 1 Kings chapter 2. First Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. When David's time to die drew near, he commanded Solomon his son, saying, I am about to go the way of all the earth. Be strong and show yourself a man, and keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and keeping his statutes, his commandments, his rules, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you turn, that the Lord may establish his work that he spoke concerning me, saying, this is 2 Samuel 7. If your sons pay close attention to their way, to walk before me in faithfulness with all their heart and with all their soul, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel. This is calling back to the inauguration of the Davidic covenant. It is so fascinating to me to read verse 3 in light of just spending almost an hour talking about the failures of David. Keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and keeping his statutes, his commandments, his rules, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses. I'm just trying to imagine the pain and the regret and the things going through his mind as he's telling his son this. Man, I ignored the 7th commandment, the 6th commandment, the 1st commandment, Exodus 30, Deuteronomy 22, Leviticus 17, the list goes on. We could just list law after covenant after thing that he broke, and none of it was worth it. And he looks at his son Solomon, who is about to take over the reins, a job that David well knows how difficult and how soul-wrenching and challenging it can be. And he says, above all else, he doesn't tell Solomon to seek wisdom. He doesn't tell Solomon to not marry many women because it's a problem. He doesn't tell Solomon to not walk out on the rooftop in the springtime because that's just a bad idea. Keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and keeping his statutes, his commandments, his rules, his testimonies, as is written in the law of Moses. This really echoes Psalm 119. If you remember Psalm 119, every single verse references law, commandment, testimony, rule, statute, some word referring to the law, the word of the Lord, and he lists a bunch of them right here: statutes, commandments, rules, testimonies, as it is written in the law. Bottom line, know that thing backwards and forwards, that you may prosper in all you do, and wherever you turn, that the Lord may establish his word. This is the covenant language we've been seeing the whole time. This is what God told Moses at the mountain. Keep charge of the Lord, keep his ways, walk in the statutes and the commandments and the testimonies, follow the law that you may prosper wherever you turn in all that you do. This is exactly covenant language from the beginning, all the way from Abrahamic covenant. It's the same language going all the way through. David is literally just repeating what God has been saying for thousands of years. This is how the relationship works. This is how it's always worked. This is what you do. And I just love that this moment, now he goes on to talk about some other stuff, specifics and details, but I love that this moment is captured between Father King and Son King incumbent. Above all else, follow the law of Moses. Keep it on your heart. Do not stray from this, because I have strayed from it in chapters 11 and 12 and 13 and 24 and many other places that were not recorded in our Bible. And it's not worth it. David knows firsthand the dangers of walking away from these things. And I think this is for us as well. Now, obviously, we have the atoning work of Christ, and we are free, and we are new creations, and all of that. But man, what a way to inspire thanksgiving in us. What a way to inspire worship in us, that Jesus has done this for us, and that we get to just be faithful and obedient to Christ now, instead of having to write out and memorize the entire Torah. Maybe you still should. It's probably a good idea. But all this has been done and is finished in Christ, and that's just so amazing and so encouraging. To finish off this last section, before I go through that, anybody have any comments or questions? Yeah. Yeah, it's possible that was part of his motivation. Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely one way to take it. For me, the way that I think David's too smart to not get what God's getting at. I think God, in his question, and even the fact that it's written as the third option, isn't the right answer always C? In a multiple choice A, B, or C, that I think David sees and understands. Now, whether he responds appropriately to that, I don't know. Maybe he was going, because obviously he doesn't die. Maybe somebody he knows dies. Maybe. What I don't know is if it was just going to be him or if it was going to be all the people. Was that 3 months of running going to be 3 months of exile for all of Israel? It says the first person he, so my assumption is it's going to be like running from Absalom and Saul like he's done his whole life, but that affects so many more people than him too. I mean, when he comes back from running away from Absalom, when Absalom's finally dead, he comes back, and the 10 concubines that he left to take care of the house and everything, he basically just, here, I'll give you a big house and I'll take care of you guys the rest of your life. And then it specifically says he doesn't ever sleep with them again. Clearly he sees the toll that took on people. And again, like I said, from the text, we don't know specifically whether that was David alone or whether that was a full-on exile. But, yeah. Yeah, Gene. Mm-hmm. Sure. The interesting thing is that Jesus comes from the line of Nathan. Nathan, which was Solomon's third son, or sorry, David's third son, the older brother of Solomon, and we have almost zero information about Nathan at all. It was not Solomon. No. Interestingly, it was a son of Bathsheba and not a son of, he had so many wives, I can't remember the names. But when he was in Hebron, this was a son of Bathsheba after all of that. And it's the third son, which Cain, Abel, Seth, I don't know. There's a lot of interesting things in that. But yeah, I forgot about that. And I was reading through and I went, oh yeah, it wasn't Solomon, it was Nathan, this nobody son of David of Bathsheba that there's almost no mention of, which I think is probably significant in the fact that it is in the line of David, but in some ways Solomon might even get put on a bigger pedestal, even though he ends his life poorly, as opposed to David, I think, ends his life well overall. It's not necessarily through the conquering kings all the way down the line, because Solomon's line ends up being a whole bunch of nasty kings and the split of the kingdom of Israel, and it's a whole bunch of a mess. I don't know if any, besides maybe Josiah and a couple others, actually play the mediatory role ever again, as the kings should. I mean, most of them are, and they did evil in the sight of the Lord, and he got killed 9 months later, and, you know. Yeah, any other questions, thoughts, comments? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this very much follows the words that he gave. Now, whether Solomon is referring to the same instance or not, at least once, probably more than once, David was giving this wisdom to Solomon, and hopefully all of his sons. But yeah, that's good. I don't know much. I mean, most of it seems to follow, most of 1st and 2nd Kings seem to follow basically Solomon's line. Pat, or Greg, do you know of any specific mentions? I mean, literally Nathan's mentioned like once, and there's almost nothing except the genealogy in Luke. Greg feigns ignorance. She was asking if any of the other sons of David are really mentioned or have any significant role besides Solomon, and then Nathan being mentioned in the Luke genealogy. The sons of Bathsheba specifically. Yeah, there's like 13 other sons mentioned by other concubines later down in the list, and there's almost nothing on any of those. Oh, it was Abishai, I think? The 4th son, I believe? Yeah. Right. And then Nathan and a couple other of the prophets and a couple other people were like, we weren't invited to this, along with Solomon. Yeah. Yeah, there was that. There was an attempt of, probably the rightful wife of David. Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, and as you would expect from a royal family. I don't know if any of you watch The Crown at all, but there's a duke of this and a duchess of that and a earl of this, and they all have some sort of thing, that they've got to do. All right, let me fill this out here for you guys. Oh, why does it go to the beginning? Probably because I pushed beginning. Last 4 questions on there that we fill out every time. What is the covenant that applies to this section? We've been in the Davidic covenant. That's where we are now, where we're still. How do people worship under this covenant? Mostly the same as it's always been. Obedience to God's law and commands, loyalty and monotheism, plus an obedience to the king as God's mediator of sin, and trusting that he is the one telling them where they should be going. What does this story tell us about God? I think we see, there's lots of stuff. You can write down your own. I think we see that he gives authority in order to bless his people. We see that in Romans 16 as well. The Lord gives authority in order to bless his people, not to burden them, not to punish them, but in order that they might be blessed. And when people abuse that authority or ignore that authority, covenant is broken and pain happens. And how does this story teach us to respond to God? I think we thank God for the humble sacrifice of Jesus. All those things that David tried to do with a good heart, I'm sure, and a pretty good understanding of the law in trying to offer sacrifice. God punished me, not them. He couldn't, bottom line. It doesn't matter how pure his motives were, he couldn't. And Jesus did all of the things that David could not. And sorry if that's the Bible school answer, but I think that is one of the most important things to take away from this. Yeah. And he didn't fail. He never failed. And he never has and he never will. And he is the one that finally takes that authority and really does bless the people the way it was always supposed to be. So on that note, let me pray, and we'll end our night. Lord, thank you so much for your faithfulness, for your patience, for your long suffering with your people that have rebelled for thousands of years, and yet you remain faithful, you remain patient, you remain loving, you provide a remnant and a way out. We thank you, Lord, for the incredible blessing of being born in the last days, not having to live through this, getting to experience the fruit of Jesus for our whole lives. Not having to look forward to anything but his triumphant return. Thank you for the clarity. I pray that you would give us boldness to speak the truth in love to those around us, to reach out and call people out of the darkness and into your glorious light, and that we would take this as an opportunity to celebrate what you have done and how perfectly you have done it. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Thanks for being here tonight, guys. We'll see you Sunday and next week.